My name is Daphne Calloway. I am 34 years old, and 3 Christmases ago, I sat in my car on Grandin Road in Hyde Park, Cincinnati, watching frost creep along the bottom edge of my windshield, a manila folder sitting on the passenger seat beside me, like a quiet promise I'd made to myself 7 years earlier, and was only now getting around to keeping. 2 Cincinnati Police Department detectives were parked in a black unmarked Chevy Tahoe half a block behind me, engine running, waiting for my signal. Inside the colonial brick house at the end of that driveway, the one with the wraparound porch, the brass pineapple knocker my mother had polished every November since I was 9, the rosemary garland threaded through the same foam backing she'd used for 15 straight Christmases, my family was gathering around the dinner table. I could see the dining room chandelier through the front window, warm and amber, throwing that particular glow that makes any house look like the inside of a family that loves each other completely. I knew exactly how many place settings were on that table. I had been counting them for over 2 decades, 9. There were always 9. One for my mother Linda, one for my father Gerald, one for my brother Tucker, one for Tucker's wife Brianne, 2 smaller ones for their kids, Emma, who was 6, and Colt, who was 4, one for my grandmother June, one for my Aunt Carol, and one for Carol's boyfriend Dennis, a quiet man from her church in Madeira who'd been coming to Christmas Eve dinner for 3 years running and had more of a permanent seat at that table than I did. 9 settings for 9 people in a house where 10 people were blood. And me, 34 years old, senior forensic accountant, certified fraud examiner, a woman who had spent the better part of a decade untangling other families' financial lies for a living, arriving every December to my own family's Christmas, knowing that the hall closet held a folding chair with my name on it. I wasn't going in for a seat that night. I was going in to end the story this family had been telling about me since I was old enough to notice I was the wrong child, the difficult one, the one who couldn't let anything go. I was going in with $193,000 worth of certified bank transfer records, a grandmother who had finally, at 81 years old, run completely out of mercy she was willing to extend to the wrong people, and 2 police detectives who had spent the better part of 4 months reading every document in the case file I'd built without anyone ever asking me to build it. I sat in that car for 11 minutes. Marcus had offered to come with me, and I'd told him no, gently but clearly, because this needed to be mine and June's, and he'd kissed my forehead in the driveway of our house in Oakley and said, "I'll be right here when you're done," and driven to his parents' place in Hyde Park to wait. That's its own kind of love, the kind that doesn't need to be in the room to be real. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror before I got out. Brown eyes, my grandmother's cheekbones, a blush silk blouse I'd bought at the Nordstrom in Kenwood specifically for this night, because I had learned a long time ago that when you walk into a room where nobody expects to take you seriously, you dress like someone they're going to have no choice but to look at. I picked up the folder. I got out of the car. The pineapple knocker was cold under my hand. Before I tell you what happened in that dining room, I need you to do something for me. Drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. I want to know where you are, what city, what time it is for you tonight. I think about that a lot when I'm telling this story. All the women hearing it, in their kitchens and on their couches and in their cars and parking lots, with earbuds in. I want to picture exactly who is sitting with me right now. And before we get into this, please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Only if you've ever sat at a table where everyone else fit, and you were the math that didn't work out. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in a brick colonial on Grandin Road in Hyde Park, the kind of Cincinnati neighborhood where the houses have names even if nobody uses them, where the trees are old enough that their roots crack the sidewalks and nobody fixes it because the cracked sidewalks are part of the charm. My father, Gerald Calloway, 58 years old now, gray at the temples and broad-shouldered in the way of men who used to do physical labor and still carry the posture of it, ran a mid-sized commercial construction company called Calloway Builders that his own father had started in 1968, pouring foundations for strip malls along Reading Road on Cincinnati's north side. By the time I was born, Callaway Builders had grown into something that built office parks, parking garages, and mid-size commercial developments across 3 counties, and my father wore that company like a second skin. It was not just his job, it was the architecture of his entire identity, the proof that the Callaway men built things that lasted. My brother Tucker came first, 18 months before me, golden-haired and easy in his body, the way some boys just are, with a laugh that made adults like him instantly, and an ability to charm his way around consequences that I recognized even as a child without having the vocabulary for it yet. Tucker was the heir apparent to Callaway Builders from before he could read a blueprint, and our father never once tried to be subtle about it. He took Tucker to job sites on Saturday mornings, starting when Tucker was 9 years old, taught him how to walk a site in steel-toed boots, how to shake hands with subcontractors, how to read a blueprint spread across a makeshift table of plywood and sawhorses. Tucker brought home stories from those Saturdays, the way other kids brought home art projects, and our parents listened with the focused pride of people watching the next chapter of their family's story write itself in real time. I was never invited on a Saturday. When I was 14 and asked, just once, if I could come to a site too, my father looked at me with the particular expression of a man rerouting a conversation he doesn't want to have, and said, "It's not really your thing, Daff. Why don't you and Mom do something that weekend?" What my mother and I did that weekend was drive to the Kenwood Town Center, where she bought herself a blazer for a luncheon she had that next week and bought me nothing, because I hadn't asked for anything, because by 14, I had already learned the particular efficiency of not asking for things that were never going to be offered. My mother, Linda Callaway, is harder to describe than my father, because she wasn't cruel in the straightforward way cruelty is easy to name. She was a woman who had grown up the second of 4 sisters in a house in Norwood, Ohio, where her own father had favored her older sister so completely and so openly that my mother had spent her entire childhood being called the practical one, which is a gentle way of saying the unchosen one, the one whose purpose is to support the story whose main character is someone else. I believe, in the clearest part of my understanding, that she swore she would never do to her own children what her father did to her. I believe she meant it, and I believe she did it anyway, because nobody teaches you how to stop repeating the wound that shaped you. They just teach you to repeat it with better furniture, and a cleaner kitchen, and a chandelier set to the right warmth to make it all look like a home that works. She favored Tucker, not with the aggressive, conscious favoritism of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, but with the quiet, constant, invisible favoritism of someone who has simply organized the world around one assumption, that Tucker matters more. His sports schedule shaped our family's calendar. His accomplishments were announced at dinner, with the energy of press releases. His failures, and he had them, he always had them, he just had a father who cleaned them up fast enough that they never left a mark, were absorbed and explained and contextualized into the family narrative as temporary detours on a certain trajectory toward success. Mine were simply expected. There was a Thanksgiving when I was 16 that I come back to constantly, the way you come back to the specific moment you understood something you'd always half known. Tucker had just received his acceptance letter to Miami University in Oxford, his father's alma mater, the only school Tucker had actually wanted to get into, the school that felt like a birthright, and my parents announced it at the dinner table like he had been elected to something. My father actually stood up and gave a toast. He stood up at our own dining room table, the one with the good china and the candlesticks my mother only got out for the holidays, and raised his glass to his son getting into a state school in southwestern Ohio, and my grandmother June, sitting at the end of the table near me, in a gray cardigan that smelled like her house on Erie Avenue, like cinnamon and Estee Lauder and old books, leaned over and squeezed my hand under the table without saying anything to the room. Later, in the kitchen while I was helping her rinse plates, she said quietly, "You're going to go somewhere. They're going to have to look up to find you. I just know it, Daphne." She was the only one who said anything like that to me. Ever. My grandmother, June Whitfield, my mother's mother, had lived 2 streets over on Erie Avenue since before I was born, in a smaller house with a garden she tended herself and a reading chair by the front window, and 31 years of work as a schoolteacher at Fairview German Language School behind her. She had her own money. Not Callaway money, which was always understood to be my father's money, and therefore Tucker's money eventually, but her late husband Howard's money, quietly and carefully invested over the decades after he passed, a portfolio that sat somewhere around $2.3 million by the time I was in college, though I didn't know the exact number then. What I knew was that when I was at June's house, she asked me what I was reading and actually listened to the answer. She asked me what I thought about things and actually waited for a response. She told me I was smart, the way you tell someone something that is simply true, without attaching a condition to it, without the implied but that every compliment in my parents' house seemed to carry. She was my map. She was the one person in that family who made me feel like where I was going was worth the trouble of getting there. I ended up at the University of Cincinnati for college, in the Carl H. Lindner College of Business, on a partial academic scholarship I had earned entirely on my own merits, studying accounting because I loved the structural certainty of it, the clean morality of a ledger where numbers either matched or they didn't, where there was no golden child in a trial balance, no favoritism in a variance analysis. I worked part-time at Katz, Teller, Brandt & Hild, a mid-sized CPA firm downtown on 4th Street, starting my sophomore year, and I learned to do real audits before I had a degree to prove I could. I graduated summa cum laude in May of 2014, the first person in my family to earn that distinction, and my parents did not come to the ceremony. Tucker had a company charity golf tournament that weekend, a client relations event for Callaway Builders that my father felt he could not reschedule, and my mother said, almost gently, "Honey, you understand, it's for the business." As if my business, the one I had built entirely without anyone's help or investment or Saturday mornings on job sites, didn't count as a business that might also deserve attendance. My grandmother June came. She sat in the 3rd row of Fifth Third Arena, in a purple dress she'd had for 15 years, and still looked beautiful in, and afterward she took me to Sato on 6th Street, just the two of us, and ordered a bottle of wine I couldn't yet fully appreciate, and gave me a toast that nobody else had thought to give. To Daphne Callaway, she said, who nobody saved a seat for, and who built her own table instead. I clinked her glass. I didn't know yet how completely literal that would become. I want to pause here and ask you something. If you had a grandparent, or anyone, really, who saw you more clearly than your own parents ever did, who told you the truth about yourself when everyone else was too busy looking somewhere else, tell me their name in the comments. I want to know about them. I think the people who save us are worth naming out loud. I started my career at Heinz & Marsh LLP, a regional accounting firm with offices on East 5th Street, in their forensic accounting division, which is the part of the profession that exists to find the money someone tried to make disappear. I was good at it in the way that people are good at things they were made for by something they didn't get to choose. Patient, methodical, the kind of person who doesn't get bored checking a column of numbers for the 4th time because the 4th check is always where the lie is hiding. By 26, I'd been promoted to senior associate. By 29, I'd left for a smaller, sharper firm, Halloran Forensic Group on Sycamore Street, where I built a specialty in trust and estate fraud. Cases where elderly people's families quietly helped themselves to money those elderly people had spent their lives building. Cases that, in retrospect, I was clearly practicing for without knowing yet exactly which case I was practicing for. The first crack appeared in October of 2016. I was 24 years old, 2 years into my career, still living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Clifton, still going to family dinners every other Sunday because some stubborn, foolish, quietly hopeful part of me hadn't given up on being loved the way Tucker was loved. I still believed, at 24, that there was some version of effort that would get me there, some accomplishment big enough, some problem solved well enough, some right moment when my parents would finally see me the way June had always seen me. My father called me on a Tuesday night in October, his voice carrying a tightness I didn't often hear in it, and told me that Callaway Builders' outside bookkeeper had found a discrepancy, his word, discrepancy, in the accounts for a commercial project in Mason that had recently gone over budget by nearly $400,000 due to a subcontractor dispute. He'd put Tucker in charge of managing the project's financial accounts, Tucker being newly titled as Vice President of Operations at 25 years old, with no formal financial training, and the bookkeeper's quarterly reconciliation had flagged $61,000 that didn't track. He asked me if I could take a look, unofficially, before we bring anyone external in. I said yes immediately. I said yes before he finished the sentence, because I was 24 years old and some hungry part of me heard this as the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment they finally needed me the way they'd always needed Tucker. The moment I could matter in this family in a way that matched what I already knew I was capable of. I drove to Grandin Road that Saturday with my laptop and spent 6 hours at the kitchen table, going through bank statements and project ledgers, and inside those 6 hours, I found exactly what the bookkeeper had sensed but hadn't been able to name. 11 separate transfers from the Mason project account into a personal LLC called TC Holdings, totaling $61,400, executed over 4 months, signed off each time by Tucker as authorized project manager. I found my father in his study, where he was watching a Bengals game with the sound low, and I laid it out for him. Every transfer, every date, the LLC's registration, which I'd pulled from the Ohio Secretary of State database in about 3 minutes. He listened, and I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before. Not fall, not crumble, but go very still and very careful. The face of a man doing fast, private arithmetic about what this would cost him versus what it would cost to make it disappear. "Don't say anything to your mother yet," he said. "Let me talk to Tucker first." I drove home that night believing something was finally going to change. I believed it for 4 days, which is longer than I should have believed it, but shorter than the version of me at 15 would have believed it. So I'll call that growth. What actually happened, my father met privately with Tucker. Tucker told him the transfers were a bridge loan structure, a routine measure to cover a vendor shortfall on an overlapping project, already in the process of being reversed. This was a lie, but it was a confident lie, delivered with Tucker's particular brand of certainty. The certainty of a man who has spent his entire life being believed because the person in front of him needed to believe him. My father, who had built 26 years of identity around the story of Tucker's competence, chose the confident lie over the spreadsheet I had handed him. 3 days later, at a family dinner I had specifically been invited to, my father told me, in front of my mother and Tucker's then-girlfriend Brianne, that he'd looked into it further, and that I had misread a set of routine intercompany transfers that were already being rectified, and that he would appreciate it going forward if I didn't go through the company's financial records without being explicitly asked. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Dad, I have the bank statements. I can walk you through every transfer date by date." "Daphne," my mother's voice, flat and sharp, the voice she used when she thought I was about to embarrass everyone. "Your father said it's handled." Tucker didn't even look uncomfortable. He looked at me with something that was almost pity, the generous pity of someone who has never once had to worry about being believed, and said, "It's complicated stuff, Daph. Commercial construction has a lot of moving parts. You're great at what you do, but you're probably not seeing the full picture on this one." I had 3 years of forensic accounting experience, a CPA license, and 6 hours of documented analysis in my laptop bag at that dinner table. Tucker had a business degree he'd scraped through at Miami University, and a title his father had given him like a birthday present. And in that room, on that night, his confidence outweighed my evidence completely, because confidence was what that family had always rewarded, and evidence from me had never once been the currency that bought belief. 2 months later, in December of 2016, Callaway Builders' official year-end outside audit flagged the same discrepancy I had flagged in October. The same $61,000. the same account, except Tucker, in the 2 months between my finding it and the audit team arriving, had moved enough money back and restructured TC Holdings just enough that the auditors wrote it up as a process control gap rather than fraud, recommended tighter internal controls, and closed the file. My father took that audit report and, privately, used it as proof that I had overreacted. Not proof that I had been right 2 months ahead of the official audit team. Proof that I had overreacted. That I couldn't see the full picture. That I was, as always, making something out of nothing. That Christmas, December 24th, 2016, I walked into the dining room on Grandin Road and counted 9 place settings. My mother saw me counting and registered the number a half second after I did and went to the hall closet for the folding chair, saying something breezy about squeezing me in. We'll make it work. And I sat at the corner of the table on a chair that was 4 inches shorter than everyone else's, eating Christmas Eve dinner with my plate slightly below table height, while Tucker held court about a new project the company had landed in Blue Ash. A project I would later understand had been partially funded through money that should never have left the Mason account. After dinner, I found myself in the kitchen, scraping plates, doing the cleanup nobody assigned me but that I did anyway, because it gave my hands something useful to be doing, while my chest worked through whatever it was working through. June found me there, at the sink, and put her hand over mine on the edge of the counter, and said very quietly, "I believe you about the money. I've watched that boy talk his way around consequences since he was 9 years old, talking a teacher out of a detention slip. You keep your receipts, Daphne. Always keep your receipts." I didn't understand yet that she was giving me instructions, not just comfort. I want to ask you something. If you've ever been the one in your family who understood money, who got quietly handed that responsibility because everyone else somehow knew you were the one who'd actually handle it honestly, tell me in the comments, because I think there are more of us sitting in that kitchen than anyone ever talks about. In 2018, I started dating Marcus Reyes, an ER physician at Christ Hospital, whom my closest friend Priya Anand. We'd become inseparable during our CPA exam study group, and she'd grown into something like a sister to me, the kind you assemble rather than inherit, had maneuvered me into meeting at a free store food bank charity gala she'd bought us tickets to, and then pretended she'd accidentally double-booked. Marcus was 31, straightforward in a way that startled me the first few times, because I wasn't used to people saying exactly what they meant without a second layer underneath it. He asked about my work with genuine interest. He remembered things I'd mentioned in passing. He came to my 30th birthday dinner, 6 people at Salazar in Over the Rhine, and afterward in the car he asked me why my family hadn't been there, and I said it was a work night and it was fine, and he looked at me for a long moment and said, "Daphne, it's a Tuesday at 7 p.m., nobody's working." I started seeing a therapist that year, Dr. Renata Osei, a woman in her late 40s with an office on Erie Avenue, coincidentally 2 blocks from my grandmother's house, which I always found vaguely meaningful. It was Dr. Osei who first said the word scapegoat to me, clinically, as a structural concept rather than an insult. She explained that families under sustained pressure often unconsciously assign one child to absorb collective anxiety and another to embody collective hope, and that neither child gets any say in which role they're handed. She said the scapegoat child usually leaves the family system the most functional, because she's spent her entire life solving problems nobody thanked her for solving, and has therefore developed a problem-solving capacity that the family simultaneously relies on and resents. I sat with that for a long time. It didn't stop hurting, but it gave the hurt a shape, which turns out to be its own kind of help. I built my career the way some people build a fortress, methodically, without asking permission, without waiting to be invited. By 30, I was a senior forensic accountant at Halloran Forensic Group, carrying a certified fraud examiner credential I'd earned on evenings and weekends, while also working full-time, specializing in elder financial exploitation and trust disputes. I bought a townhouse in Oakley in January 2020 for $312,000, a mortgage entirely in my own name, a down payment entirely from my own savings, closing on it during a week when the temperature in Cincinnati dropped to 4 degrees and the pipes in my old Clifton apartment froze, and I thought, standing in the empty kitchen of that new house with a box of kitchen things balanced on one hip, nobody gave me this. Nobody helped me with this. This is exactly mine. I still went to Christmas Eve dinner every year. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters to the story that I wasn't secretly biding my time, wasn't building evidence towards some planned confrontation while pretending to be a participating family member. I was genuinely still showing up because some part of me loved them. Messy, one-sided, foolish as it was, and because June was there, and because Dr. Osei kept reminding me that walking away from a family doesn't require a dramatic announcement. It can be a door that closes quietly, when you're ready, at whatever pace suits you. I wasn't ready yet, and every December I walked back through that door and sat in the slightly shorter chair and told myself that proximity was its own form of trying. Then, June had a stroke. March 2021, a Tuesday morning, in her kitchen on Erie Avenue. Minor, compared to what it could have been, she recovered most of her function over the following months at Tri-Health Bethesda North's rehabilitation unit, with some remaining weakness on her left side. But it scared everyone, and it prompted her to do something she'd been quietly putting off: update her estate documents. She called me specifically, at my office at Halloran on a Wednesday afternoon, and asked if I would sit with her and her attorney, Philip Aldrich, on East 4th Street downtown, and help her review her accounts and her will, because, she said, you are the only person in this family who actually understands money, and more importantly, the only one I trust not to let anyone push me around while I'm trying to think clearly. That phone call is the thread that unravels the whole thing, because reviewing June's accounts in the spring of 2021 is how I first found what Tucker had been doing to her for 2 years. Here is what I found, working carefully, quietly, entirely on my own time, using only documents June herself authorized me to access as her designated financial advocate. In late 2019, my mother had quietly arranged for Tucker to be made a co-trustee on June's revocable living trust. She had framed it to June as Tucker helping manage the business side of things so you don't have to worry, and June, who was 77 at the time and had always trusted her daughter's judgment, perhaps more than her daughter deserved, had signed the paperwork without fully understanding that co-trustee authority meant Tucker could authorize disbursements from her trust account. The first disbursement had been $8,000 in February 2020, documented in the trust records as home repair reimbursement for trustee residents. June had no home repairs that spring. None. When I quietly asked her about it, she looked at the paperwork I placed in front of her and said, "I don't know what that is." I didn't ask for any repair money. Then $15,000 in October 2020, labeled medical advance. June's actual out-of-pocket medical expenses that year, above and beyond her Medicare and supplemental coverage, had totaled $1,190. Then, while June was at Bethesda North recovering from her stroke, while she was in a rehabilitation unit, doing physical therapy with her left hand, unable to monitor a bank account, 3 transfers between April 7th and May 14th of 2021, totaling $94,000, had moved out of her trust account and into TC Holdings, LLC, the same LLC from 2016. Tucker hadn't even bothered to change the vehicle. He had just driven it back to the same well one more time, because the first time, nobody had stopped him. I sat alone in my office at Halloran on a Thursday evening in late July 2021, building empty cleaning crew working 2 floors down, the sounds of a vacuum running somewhere distant, staring at a spreadsheet I'd built over 6 weeks of evenings and weekend hours. Total, $117,000. From a 79-year-old stroke survivor's trust account. By her own grandson, while her family called him the capable one and called me the difficult one for the crime of having a paper trail. I did not go to my parents this time. I had paid for that lesson in full, at a kitchen table in 2016, with 6 hours of documented evidence that got me told I'd misread routine transfers. This time I went directly to Philip Aldrich, and I laid every document in front of him, every transfer record, every mislabeled disbursement cross-referenced against the trust's own required accounting and June's actual expense history, and Philip went pale in the particular controlled way of a careful man who has just had a very large problem placed on his desk, and said, "This is the most complete elder financial exploitation case file I have ever seen assembled outside of a law enforcement investigation." "Does June know?" "Not yet," I said. I wanted to be certain before I broke her heart. We told her together, Philip and I, on a Tuesday afternoon in August 2021, in his conference room on East 4th Street, sun coming through the blinds in long horizontal bars across the table. June sat very still, her cane resting against the edge of the chair, listening to me walk through every date and every dollar. When I finished, she didn't cry. She looked at her own hands in her lap for a long moment, and then she said, "Your mother pushed for Tucker to be on that trust. I knew it felt wrong when I signed it. I signed it anyway because I was tired of questioning my own family's motives, and because I thought, God, I thought he'd grown up enough that I could trust him." She looked at me. "You found all of this on your own time, didn't you? Nobody asked you." "You asked me to review your accounts, Grandma," I said. "This is what reviewing your accounts looked like." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, the same hand she'd squeezed under a Thanksgiving dinner table when I was 16 years old, and said, "I want every dollar documented, certified, dated, backed, and I want you to hold it. Not Philip, you." What followed were 18 months of the most unglamorous kind of work, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that doesn't make a sound, that is just a woman at her desk at night, building a case that cannot be argued with. Philip sent formal demand letters requiring Tucker to resign as co-trustee and repay the misappropriated funds. Tucker denied everything through an attorney he hired, a man named Dale Sims from a firm in Blue Ash, claiming the transfers were legitimate compensation and reimbursement for his time as trustee, an argument that collapsed when Philip pointed out that the trust document itself specified zero compensation for co-trustees and required itemized receipts for all reimbursements, receipts that did not exist for any of the 11 transactions in question. My mother called me in September 2021, the angriest I had ever heard her voice, and said, "How dare you go to Philip behind this family's back? Your grandmother is still recovering, she's confused about what she signed, and you are using that to go after your own brother." I said, "Mom, I have 11 transfers with dates and amounts going into an LLC Tucker controls. Grandma's medical records show she wasn't having home repairs, and her Medicare EOBs show her out-of-pocket expenses were under $1,200. This isn't confusion, this is a spreadsheet." She said, "You have always looked for a reason to make yourself the hero and your brother the problem. I don't know why you cannot just let him have one good thing." And then she hung up, and I sat in my kitchen in Oakley for 20 minutes afterward, thinking about that sentence. Let him have one good thing. As if my grandmother's life savings were something Tucker simply hadn't been given yet. As if the role I was playing was the greedy one. My father did not call me at all, not once, across the entire 18 months. He closed ranks around Tucker the way he always had. Instinctively, completely, without asking a single question about the documents I had presented. And the silence from him sat differently than my mother's anger, quieter, colder. The silence of a man who had decided, 34 years earlier, which child he would spend himself on, and was not prepared, even at this cost, to reconsider. Tucker, under sustained legal pressure from Philip's escalating letters and the threat of a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty, repaid $40,000 of the $117,000 by the spring of 2022. He refused to pay the rest, maintained it was earned compensation, and my mother, devastated by the conflict, exhausted by 18 months of watching her family come apart, pressured June to settle for the partial repayment, remove Tucker as co-trustee, and close the matter privately. June agreed. She told me privately why. "I'm not protecting Tucker. I'm protecting Linda from watching her son be prosecuted. There's a difference, even when it doesn't look like one. I understood the distinction. I didn't tell her it was enough, because it wasn't, and I had made myself a promise somewhere in those 18 months that I was going to stop pretending small gestures were whole repairs. For about a year, the family rearranged itself into a kind of cautious, performative normalcy. Tucker took a quieter role at Callaway Builders. My mother resumed inviting me to dinners with the same careful warmth she always produced when she needed things to look intact. And every Christmas Eve, there were 9 place settings at that table, and a folding chair in the hall closet that always turned out to have my name on it somehow, as if the math of that family simply could not make room for me, no matter how many times the table was reset. I kept going. I want you to understand that I wasn't secretly planning anything during those dinners. I was just still showing up, still choosing to love them in my imperfect, conditional, already bruised way. Because walking away from a family is a decision that takes its own time and cannot be rushed without becoming something ugly. Then came November 2023. June was hospitalized again, pneumonia this time, 11 days at Tri-Health Good Samaritan, serious enough that the family arranged for temporary financial power of attorney to sit with my mother, because someone needed to manage June's bills and automatic payments while she was too ill to do it herself. And my mother volunteered in the way that my mother always volunteered, for things that put her adjacent to control. June, from her hospital bed, running a fever of 102 on the 3rd day, trusted her daughter's word that it was just administrative. Within those 11 days, while my grandmother lay in a hospital on Clifton Avenue with a chest infection and an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, $76,000 moved out of her personal checking account at Fifth Third Bank, not the trust, which Philip had locked down structurally after 2021, but June's working checking account, the one she used for groceries and utility bills, and the monthly automatic transfer to her housekeeper on Erie Avenue, into a new account at U.S. Bank that my mother had opened privately 2 weeks before June's hospitalization. The new account was titled Callaway Family Holdings. I found this not through any suspicion of my mother specifically, but through pure habit. June, from her hospital bed, half joking and half serious in the way she sometimes was about things that were not actually jokes, had asked me to check her accounts while she was laid up. Just a quick look, make sure nothing's going sideways. I had her online banking password because she'd given it to me when I became her financial advocate after the stroke, and I pulled up her checking account on a Thursday evening at my kitchen table in Oakley, and within 40 minutes, I was looking at a $76,000 transfer to an account I didn't recognize, with my mother's name on the authorization. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. Not crying, not calling anyone, just sitting, very still, the way June had sat in Philip's office in 2021, looking at a number that had a name attached to it that I had not expected to see. I called Philip the next morning and said, "It's not just Tucker this time. It's my mother." Philip was quiet for longer than I expected him to be. Then he said, "Daphne, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to handle this the way we handled it before? Demand letters, repayment, no criminal referral?" I sat with that question. I thought about June, 81 years old, in a hospital bed with a chest infection, while her own daughter helped herself to $76,000. I thought about every folding chair, every cartoon owl on a Hallmark graduation card, every Saturday morning at the mall while Tucker learned to read blueprints. I thought about my father's silence across 18 months. I thought about the sentence, "Let him have one good thing," and the particular flavor of erasure it represented. I thought about Dr. Osei's voice, the way she'd said, "The goal was never to make them love you. The goal is to make sure the truth exists somewhere outside your own memory." I said, "No, not this time." We document everything, bank certified, dated, complete, and when Grandma is well enough to make her own decision about what she wants done, we let her decide. But either way, Philip, this time I want it built so airtight that the confidence of the person telling the lie is no longer sufficient to make the lie more credible than the evidence. I am done losing that argument. June came home from Good Samaritan the week before Thanksgiving, 2023, frail but alert, and I drove to Erie Avenue on a Saturday afternoon and sat with her in her reading chair while she looked through the documents I'd compiled. The $76,000 transfer. The new U.S. bank account, my mother's name. June went through every page slowly, and when she was done, she folded her hands in her lap and looked out the front window at the garden, dormant now in November, and said something I've thought about nearly every day since. I raised a daughter, she said, who grew up watching her own father choose her sister every single time, and I believe in my heart that Linda spent her entire life telling herself she would never do that to her own children, and I believe she meant it. And I believe that when the company started failing and the money got short, she looked around for what was available, and she made the same choice her father made, just with a different target. She chose Tucker over me, the same way her father chose her sister over her. She paused. That doesn't mean I'm going to let her keep the money. She asked what I wanted. Not what was fair, not what was right. What did I, Daphne, actually want from this? And I gave her the honest answer that I had been carrying for 7 years without quite saying it out loud. I wanted the truth to be spoken in that dining room, at that table, with everyone present. Not in a lawyer's office, where it could be managed and minimized and quietly absorbed into the family narrative as just another misunderstanding that I had overreacted to. I wanted every person who had ever sat at that table to see, in one room, all at once, what I had been carrying alone. June said, "Then that's what we'll do." The 6 weeks between that Saturday afternoon and Christmas Eve were the most focused work of my professional life, except this time, the case file was my own family, and the forensic accounting was my own childhood. Philip built the legal and criminal referral documents simultaneously, a civil demand for $153,000, the $77,000 still owed from Tucker's theft, plus the full $76,000 from my mother's transfer, and a parallel referral to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office for elder financial exploitation, a felony in Ohio. I worked alongside a detective in the Cincinnati Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, Detective Renee Walsh, a woman in her late 40s with close-cut hair and a flat, precise efficiency I found immediately comforting, who went through every document in my file over the course of 2 90-minute meetings at the CPD district station on Ludlow Avenue, and said, after finishing the second meeting, "Ms. Calloway, I have worked elder financial exploitation cases for 11 years. This is the cleanest case file I have ever received from a victim's family member. You should have been a detective." I told her I'd considered it, but forensic accounting had better health insurance. She almost smiled. June formally amended her power of attorney documents with Philip, removing my mother entirely and naming me as her sole financial and healthcare proxy. And she made the final decision that shaped the shape of this ending. She wanted it done at Christmas Eve dinner. At that table. In that room, she wanted every person who had told the story of this family. The story where Tucker was the capable one and I was the difficult one, and the evidence was always less credible than the confidence, to be in the same room when that story finally fell apart. They built that table on a lie, June told me, a week before Christmas, sitting in her reading chair in the front window. I want them to watch it come apart in the room where they told it the loudest. Detective Walsh arranged to position 2 officers and herself in an unmarked vehicle nearby on Christmas Eve, ready to enter the house upon June's direct signal. Because June was adamant that this be entirely her decision, made with full clarity, not something done to her family without her authorization, but something she herself, at 81 years old, after decades of swallowing things, had finally and permanently decided not to swallow. The night was cold and clear. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2023. The kind of Cincinnati winter, where your breath shows in the air, and the streetlights look soft through the frost. I sat in my car on Grandin Road for 11 minutes before going in, and Marcus waited at his parents' house in Hyde Park, and the 2 detectives in the unmarked Tahoe kept their engine running half a block back. I picked up the folder. I walked up the brick path. The pineapple knocker was cold. The door opened, and the smell of the house came out to meet me. Rosemary from the turkey my mother had been cooking since 1 in the afternoon. The particular warmth of a house that has had its heat on high for company. A faint undercurrent of the candle she always burned in the front hall at Christmas. Something called winter berry that she'd been buying at Bath & Body Works since 2005. My mother was already reaching for the hall closet. "Oh, Daphne. We didn't quite—" "I won't need a chair tonight, Mom," I said. "I'm not staying for dinner." The hallway went quiet. Tucker came to the kitchen doorway, a glass of red wine in his hand, and he looked at me and then at the folder I was holding, and something shifted in his face. Something that wasn't quite recognition but was adjacent to it. The expression of a person who has been waiting, on some unconscious level, for a particular knock at a particular door for a very long time. My grandmother June appeared from the dining room, moving slowly with her cane, in a soft blue cardigan, her white hair neat, her face composed with the specific composure of a woman who has made an irreversible decision and is now simply waiting for the moment to catch up to her. "Everyone come sit down," she said, not loudly, but with the authority of a woman who had taught school for 31 years and understood that authority doesn't require volume. "Daphne and I have something we need everyone to hear." Picture that room with me for a moment. The chandelier my mother always dimmed to 40% for the holidays. The good china she only used twice a year. The smell of rosemary and candle wax, and the wood fire going in the front room visible through the archway. Tucker's daughter Emma in Christmas Eve pajamas, red plaid, the kind with the feet, sitting in her chair with a crayon drawing she'd been working on before we came in, looking around at the adults with the wide, curious alertness of a 6-year-old who senses tension she cannot name. Brienne sitting very still beside Tucker, her hands folded on the table. My Aunt Carol next to Dennis, both of them clearly understanding that something was happening that had nothing to do with them. My father at the head of the table, his face already doing the careful, watchful thing it had been doing since I was 24 years old, and showed him a spreadsheet he chose not to believe. I opened the folder. I laid the first page on the table in front of me, and I spoke the way I speak in client meetings. Flat, exact, no performance in it, because performance would have let them dismiss me and exactness never had. In October 2016, I said, Tucker transferred $61,400 out of the Mason Project account at Callaway Builders into an LLC called TC Holdings. "Dad, I showed you those transfer records at this kitchen table. You told me I'd misread routine intercompany transfers." 2 months later, Callaway Builders' outside auditors found the exact same discrepancy and closed it as a process gap because Tucker had partially reversed the transfers in the interim. "You used that audit report to tell people I had overreacted." My father opened his mouth. June raised one hand, gently, and he closed it. In 2019, Tucker was made co-trustee of Grandma's trust, at Mom's arrangement. Between 2019 and 2021, while Grandma was recovering from a stroke, $117,000 moved from that trust account into TC Holdings. I have 11 transfers, dated and bank certified. Tucker repaid $40,000 under legal pressure. He has never repaid the other $77,000. Brienne turned to look at Tucker. He was looking at the tablecloth. "And in November of this year," I said, and I felt the air change in the room before I even finished the sentence. The way air changes when the thing everyone has been avoiding finally gets said. While Grandma was in the hospital with pneumonia, Mom had temporary power of attorney over her checking account. $76,000 moved out of that account in 11 days into a new account at U.S. Bank titled Callaway Family Holdings, with Mom's name as the account holder. My mother's composure came apart completely. All of it, at once. Every careful, bright, composed surface she'd maintained for 30 years went in a single breath. "Mom, I was going to put it back. I swear to God I was going to put it back. Tucker said the line of credit was going to be called, and we just needed a bridge. It was temporary. I never meant. You stole from me while I was in a hospital bed, June said. The room was silent, in the way rooms are silent, when the thing that's been true for years is finally said in a voice that everyone can hear. Both of you, June continued, looking at Tucker and then at my mother, slowly, with the terrible patience of a woman who has spent decades extending grace and has now simply run out. Not once, twice, each, across 7 years, and every single time, this family chose to believe whoever was more confident and told Daphne she was the problem for having the receipts. She looked at me, briefly, then back at my mother. I am 81 years old. I sat in a rehab unit, learning to use my left hand again, and you were taking my money. I am done protecting the people in this family who never once protected her. Tucker said my name, started to say something about figuring this out as a family, and I said, "That is what you said in 2016 at this table, Tucker. And here we are." And he stopped. I stepped into the front hall. I called Detective Walsh's direct line. I said, "She's ready. Come in." 6 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled to a quiet stop outside the house on Grandin Road. No sirens, because June had specifically asked for that mercy. Detective Walsh and a uniformed officer walked up the same brick path I had walked up 100 times as a child, and they stood in the dining room doorway, and my father made an incoherent noise about misunderstandings, and Brienne put her arms around her daughter, and my mother cried into a cloth Christmas napkin, and Tucker stared at the table. And Emma, Tucker's 6-year-old daughter, looked at the police officers in the doorway and asked, in the clear, uncomplicated voice of a child who has not yet learned to pretend, "Daddy, why are the police here?" Neither Tucker nor my mother was arrested that night. June, unwilling to have handcuffs in front of Emma and Colt, agreed with Detective Walsh to allow both of them to surrender voluntarily for booking on December 26th. But the truth had been spoken out loud in that room, by the woman it had been taken from, in front of every person who had chosen the lie. That was the reversal, not the legal proceedings that followed, that dining room, that table, that night. If you've ever had to be the one who said the true thing out loud in a room that had spent years performing like it wasn't true, tell me in the comments how long you waited. I think some of us have been sitting on that truth for longer than we should have had to. In the months that followed, Callaway Builders dissolved under the combined weight of the subcontractor lawsuit that had been circling since 2022 and the legal scrutiny the criminal filings brought to the company's books. My father, 68 years old and finally reckoning with the full measure of what his choices had made possible, sold off the company's remaining contracts and equipment in the spring of 2024, closing a business his father had started in 1968 because his son had hollowed it out and his wife had helped. Tucker pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of theft from an elderly person and was sentenced to 3 years probation and full restitution of the $77,000 still owed on the trust theft, plus his share of liability for the $76,000. My mother, facing a parallel charge, accepted a plea deal, full restitution, 18 months of probation, and narrowly avoided incarceration because June, even then, asked the prosecutor for leniency on her daughter's behalf. I did not ask for it to be harsher. I had never wanted either of them in handcuffs. I had wanted, simply, for the truth to be louder than my mother's voice in a room they thought they controlled. My father called me in February 2024, the first direct call in over 2 years, and he said, slowly, with the awkward precision of a man choosing words he has never had to choose before, "I should have looked at those statements in 2016 myself, instead of taking Tucker's word." That is the closest he has ever come to an apology. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I didn't tell him it was enough, because honesty required that I admit to myself it wasn't, and I had promised myself, in those 6 weeks of planning, that I was done calling partial truths whole repairs. My relationship with my parents now exists at a careful distance. Occasional phone calls, a birthday text, no holidays together. I have not been back to the house on Grandin Road since that Christmas Eve, and I don't think I will be. Dr. Osei calls this peace without proximity, and I've come to understand it as a complete thing, not a consolation prize for the reconciliation that never came, but its own genuine peace, earned the hard way, worth exactly what it cost. Tucker and I have spoken 3 times since his sentencing, stiff conversations, honest in a way we never managed as children. In the 3rd call, this past April, he said, "I used to think you were always trying to make me look bad. I think I just needed someone to look bad so it didn't have to be me." I told him I hoped he found a way to live that didn't require that arrangement anymore. I don't know if we'll be close, ever. But I think we might, slowly, become something smaller and truer than close. 2 people who finally see each other without the family story filtering everything, which is its own kind of relationship, even when it doesn't look like what you imagined family should look like. June is 83 now. She still lives on Erie Avenue. She comes to my house in Oakley every other Sunday, and we cook together. She taught me her German apple cake recipe last month, the one her own mother had taught her in a kitchen in Norwood in 1952, and she always, every single time, pulls out a chair for me before I even sit down, even though it's my own table, even though I never need her to. She does it because she knows, without us having to talk about it, what it means to me to never again have to wonder if there's room. I left Halloran Forensic Group last year and started my own practice, Callaway Forensic Advisory, an office on Madison Road in Oakley, 3 minutes from my front door. I specialize in elder financial exploitation cases. I have handled 14 cases in 16 months, helping other families find their Daphnes, or sometimes, and this is the harder work, helping elderly clients understand that there is no Daphne coming to find the money for them, and building a case anyway from whatever is there. Marcus and I got married this past October at the Cincinnati Art Museum, in the atrium with the tall windows looking out over Eden Park. 60 people, none of them my parents. Priya was my maid of honor. My grandmother June walked me down the aisle herself, 60 steps on her cane and her own 2 feet, declining every offer of a wheelchair or an arm to lean on, because she told me, the morning of the wedding, adjusting my veil in the mirror, "I have waited 34 years to walk you somewhere the family finally got it right. I am not doing it in a wheelchair." If you see yourself anywhere in this story, in the folding chair, in the evidence nobody believed, in the grandmother who finally said enough, in the woman who kept showing up to a table that never saved her a seat, I want to know, tell me what you would have done, sitting in that car on that cold street with that folder in your hands and those detectives waiting down the block. Leave me a comment. I read every single one, and if you want more stories like this one, check the description for more. I think about that Christmas Eve sometimes, late at night, the way you think about a door finally closing on something that took 34 years to close. I didn't get the family I wanted. I got something better, the truth, spoken once, completely, in the one room that had spent my entire childhood pretending it wasn't true. And I got to be the one who carried it there, in a silk blouse from Nordstrom and a manila folder full of receipts, to a table that never saved me a seat. I built my own table. It seats 8. There's always a chair ready for June. There's room now, slowly, for Tucker, when he's ready for what that requires. There's a seat for Priya, and for Marcus's sister, and for the 3 women from my firm I've come to love like the sisters I never had. There's room for anyone in my life who has ever told me the truth, even when it cost them something. The hall closet in my house in Oakley has a folding chair in it too. I kept it. Not to use. Marcus asked me once why I kept it, and I thought about it before I answered, because I wanted to answer honestly. I kept it because it reminds me of the specific texture of being someone's afterthought, and I never want to forget what that feels like, because the memory of it is what makes me set the table right every single time. There is always enough room, you just have to be willing to build the table yourself.